All right. John Beckard, Forward Janesville, thank you for collectively coming together for our Tuesday conference call where we invite guests and cover critical topics and questions that are on your mind. We want to encourage you to look at our Thursday Pulse online newsletter, which is really a compendium of good news and things that are going on in the community that will give you, I think, a little emotional lift. And then on Friday, we have the COVID digest that we put out. It includes analysis, useful links, and a link to the recording of this conference call. This week's conference call is always featured as a link on our Friday COVID digest. Again, one more time, if you have questions, please forward them to forward@forwardjanesville.com. They will be shuttled into to me, and we will try to get as many questions out as possible. So we have two distinguished guests today. Congressman Bryan Steil represents Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District in the House of Representatives. He was first elected in 2018. That means another election is just around the corner. I don't really think we're talking about that today, but it might come up. Also, we have Quint Studer. For more than 30 years, Quint has really given his life to designing the building blocks that guide people, organizations, and communities to achieve and sustain high performance. He is a businessman, an author, an entrepreneur, a community leader, and a mentor to many. Most recently, I want to mention this because you're going to want to seek out these resources. Most recently, he has written 2 books, Building a Vibrant Community, which many of us have read, including those of us in this room, and most recently, Busy Leader Handbook, published by Wiley last fall. So I welcome both of you. I'm going to turn over the floor first to Congressman Ryan. A lot going on in Washington, D.C. I think everybody on this call has been tracking the ins and outs of what Congress is trying to accomplish, and I'm very anxious to hear your update. Congressman Steil?
Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody on today's call. I hope everybody finds himself in good health. As everyone knows, we're under attack by an invisible virus. It's attacking our health and also having a very significant impact on our economy and jobs in Janesville and across the country. What I'd like to do is just take a few minutes off the top, walk through what we're doing from a federal perspective to attack this virus, both from helping on the health front and also on the economic front, and then save as much time as I can for questions so we can have a dialogue. So if I can, let me just set the stage for this. If you go back about a month and a half now to March 4th, Congress passed the first coronavirus bill. There's 3 bills total that have been passed. A 4th one is likely imminent. So the first coronavirus bill was roughly $8 billion. It sounded like a lot of money then. It pales in comparison now. And that ramped up our testing and provided funding to the Center for Disease Control. Then on March 13th, the president declared national emergency related to coronavirus. Declaring that national emergency freed up $50 billion that he was able to allocate in the fight against the coronavirus. Congress then passed a second coronavirus bill. This addressed paid sick leave and Medicaid funds to states. If you recall, this was the bill that came to the floor at 1 in the morning on a Saturday, had significant errors in it, worked over the weekend and amended the bill. Just to give you a flavor, this was a 110-page bill that required a 90-page amendment. The amendment passed unanimously. Then that bill went to the Senate, was ultimately signed into law. Then Congress passed the third coronavirus bill. This is the CARES Act. This is the $2 trillion program that passed just over 3 weeks ago. I'm in Janesville today, and 3 weeks ago I got in my Chevy Traverse, loaded up with some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, drove to Washington, D.C., and spoke on the House floor. Noted it's not a perfect bill. It had things like funding for the Kennedy Center, but at the same time it had the relief that was required for so many workers who had fallen on hard times. There's 4 key components of the CARES Act that I think are worthwhile highlighting on the call briefly here. First is the direct payments to individuals. This is $1,200 for an individual, $500 for a dependent child. Those have income caps, and the fade-off begins at $75,000 for an individual, $150,000 for a married couple. Over 80 million people in the United States have already received their stimulus payments. Those were made to individuals that file their taxes electronically with direct deposit. Now, the IRS is continuing to work through the roughly 80 million people who've not yet received their stimulus check. There is a portal that's on my website. I have a link. If you go to steil.house.gov, steil.house.gov, we have a big link that says coronavirus and has links to all the local, state, and federal resources that you need that I'll talk about here today. So one-stop shop, or you can obviously go directly to any of these websites as well. But if you know someone who did not yet receive their payment, I would advise you to go to that IRS website to review the status of your payment. And for those people that you or you may know that don't file taxes, they may need to go to that website to fill out additional information. The second piece I think is important, and we'll talk about this probably in more detail, this call being a little more business focused, is the Paycheck Protection Program. As many of you know, that was a $350 billion program that was given to small businesses as defined by those with 500 or fewer employees. It was the funding of this, the funding structure, I think, was very intelligently structured. Usually this would go through the Small Business Administration. We were smart enough to move it out of there and to effectively deputize all FDIC-insured financial institutions. Effectively, every bank and credit union in Janesville and Rock County is qualified to be able to process these loans. I know many businesses in Janesville were successful in obtaining their PPP loans. Some are still in process. And I know a few people had hiccups and correctly reached out to my office, and I encourage you to do that if you have problems. I'm going to come back to the PPP in a moment because the funding ran out last week, and I want to give you an update as to where we're at on that going forward. The third piece of the CARES Act relates to direct funding to states and municipalities. There's roughly $150 billion. Wisconsin's allocation of that will be roughly $2.25 billion that will then be allocated by Governor Evers to state and local and municipal governments in their work to fight the coronavirus. The fourth piece of the CARES Act was $150 billion provided to our healthcare structure, to our hospitals, to obtain personal protective equipment and other necessities on the medical front of this. One other note in the CARES Act I think is important as you talk for yourself or as you talk to, in particular, employees, is that unemployment insurance from a federal standpoint and now at the state level has changed significantly from what it used to be but 1 or 2 months ago. So let me give you just a couple quick important notes on this. One is, many of you know, the unemployment fund was increased by $600 per week. That's a very significant increase. That's federally funded. 2, the first week that would have been unpaid on unemployment insurance is now a paid week. Wisconsin is retroactively paying individuals who filed within the past handful of weeks that first week that they would have not received until the law just changed days ago. And then there's also significant changes in who qualifies for unemployment insurance. So traditionally under the old model, a gig worker, say somebody that drives Uber or Lyft, may not have qualified under the old rules. They likely qualify now, and I'd encourage people to go on to the unemployment website and to make sure that they have the latest information and to not rely on their memory of what this program was like prior to the coronavirus. I want to give you one more nugget here is, since we have a lot of folks in the business community on the call, if we look at how we're ultimately going to get through this, it's going to be in large part relying on the leaders who are on this call to step forward and find creative solutions to get us through this phase. But then also, as we get through this, as we put duct tape around our economy, it's going to be relying on the leaders on this call to also step up and make sure that all of these workers who've fallen on hard times, who are out of a job through no fault of their own, have a job to go back to. And I'm very focused on that. We've seen this kind of leadership in Janesville. We saw Prince and Charter NEX step up and provide personal protective equipment. We've also seen businesses find creative ways to keep people safe while still providing food and essential resources. You see Blaine's drive-thru being busy over at Farm and Fleet, or you see Mac's Pizza Shack on Milton Avenue doing curbside delivery where you can pay online. We're going to need more and more of that creativity from our business community and from our workers to be able to navigate these challenging times. And so I appreciate all the efforts that I know many of the people on this call are already doing and the work that they're going to be doing to help us all get back up on our feet. I just want to use my last 2 minutes here before I turn the phone over just to give a comment on the going forward. So as I noted, Congress has passed 3 coronavirus bills. The president's declared a state of emergency. Very likely that there is going to be a 4th, a 5th, a 6th coronavirus bill. I think what's critical is that these bills going forward are data-driven. They're tied to the issue at hand, and I think that's 2 key things. One, that we're providing the medical resources we need. We're making sure our nurses and our doctors have the personal protective equipment that they need, that our researchers have the resources they need to develop tests and to ultimately get us to a virus. And 2, we continue to provide the resources to our workers who've fallen on hard times and to our business leaders to make sure that we put enough duct tape around this economy so that we can get through this. And then on the other side, when we're on our feet, and we will get back on our feet, that workers have jobs to go back to in our community in Janesville, across the state and across the country. And ultimately, we're able to be stronger on the other side of this. The current discussion of what would likely be the 4th coronavirus bill is currently in discussions. Any moment now, I think there will likely be an announcement. My prediction on that is that you will see additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program. You'll very likely see additional funding for our healthcare networks and our hospitals, as well as additional funding for testing. And the advancement of our testing is going to be critical. I don't think anybody has been satisfied with where we're at. But we are all working hard to drive that forward. And so with that groundwork, I'm going to pause and look forward to answering questions on the other side. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congressman Steil. We're anxious to ask you some questions, and we will get to that. But first, we'd like to turn the floor over to Quint Studer, and Quint is going to talk about leadership in a very difficult period of our community and our country's history. So, Quint, please provide some perspective. Will you please?
Well, I will, and thank you. And first, I want to say happy anniversary to Tobin and Oakley Ryan today. So, make sure I congratulate them. What a great couple. I've been doing this quite a bit lately. Because I think my healthcare background, talking about the impact on hospitals, particularly when they gave up a lot of elective procedures, what that's done. Yesterday I was on a phone call with school districts because I've written books on school districts, but primarily for small businesses. You know, I'm anxious to hear what Congressman Steil says because our shops did not get the payroll protection plan in Janesville nor in Pensacola. They ran out of money before we got in the queue, so I'm real anxious to hear that. We did get it for some of our business ventures, but, you know, we have 178 full-time employees, about 300 seasonal employees that will probably not be working this year because we don't foresee minor league baseball playing possibly either in Beloit or Janesville, which this wasn't the right year to get the Snappers, but it is what it is, and we're committed to a long-term commitment to that. And we're excited about the stadium groundbreaking where it'll be occurring in May. So we've been hit, we've been hit with our baseball team, where that's going. We've been hit with properties. We have 200,000 square feet of commercial property. Our largest tenant, rumored is they're going to declare bankruptcy, what we've read in the Bloomberg News this morning. So, of course, we're being impacted like everyone else. We've also tried to stay open, and I appreciate Congressman Steil talking about the places that have, because it's always scary. You want your employees safe as possible, but you also want to keep something going in the community, particularly, as Congressman Steil says, to keep people working. So we appreciate the support we've gotten with the bodacious shops in Janesville. James Stockdale, a Navy officer, prisoner of war for a long time, James Collins in his book Good to Great called it the Stockdale Paradox, says you can never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current situation, whatever they might be. And, of course, most of us have heard this: hope for the best, acknowledge what could be the worst. I sort of remember this, 1995, my wife and I were vacationing, Rishi and I were vacationing in South Dakota, and sadly our youngest son, Michael, was at a campground and he got ran over. And at the time, we didn't know if he was going to live or die. He's alive today. He got taken to one hospital, transferred to another hospital, and that was it. We were sitting there hoping for the best and acknowledging what could be the worst. And I think it was interesting because what helped us in that situation is what we as leaders must do now, and that's really narrate the situation. I remember asking the doctor, is Michael going to live? And he said, we won't know for 24 to 48 hours, but here's what we're doing and here's what we need to look for. So I think when I looked at this in many of the articles I've written on this, is step one, of course, what we all did, and we're past that, is we diagnosed the situation. How long is it going to last? What's it going to be? But we really narrated not only the external environment, but the internal environment. You know, I did a 60-minute video for all our employees on creative tension from Peter Senji's work in the fifth discipline, and creative tension is where we are and where we need to be. And we talked about the fact that we're in, let's not kid ourselves, we have a lot of creative tension. Some of our employees are wondering, will they have a job? And for some, we can't guarantee they will. It depends on the economy, how much it comes back. Some of our employees, because of age and other things, are not working right now. And, you know, some tough decisions will be made. But we're very clear on that we're going to update you every Monday. Here's what we're going to tell you. We're going to be straight. We're going to be authentic. But we're going to be doing everything we can to keep as many people working as possible. But that means you're going to have to be flexible. You might have to do some things that you have not normally done. So we were really straight on the need for flexibility. And we also got into the situation, like many of you, here in Florida, and I know in Wisconsin, the schools were closed. Well, we sent as many employees that could work home. We have quite a few that can work at home, but we've had to be flexible, but sure, with their hours. In fact, we're doing a thing now where we're getting all our work-at-home parents on Zoom calls so they can share what they're doing in order to handle the online learning. I think the other key thing is one of my favorite books is E-Myth Revisited, and it talks about sometimes we work in our business so much we don't pause to work on it. Though this isn't the pause we wanted, some of us are forced to pause. We are. We're forced to pause in many, many ways. Well, this is a great time to audit our company. And John, I'm going to be sending you an audit tool that we've created that we sent out to lots of small businesses that told us they liked it, which really gives them a chance to re-look with fresh eyes at their product. You know, we had to reinvent our product at the shops and come up with healthier comfort food, which is not something we had. We've done that here. Our Blue Wahoos, our Pensacola baseball team here, is doing curbside service. We're going to open up in Beloit for the Snappers, the same thing. So it's a good chance to look at your product, look at your pricing, look at your promotion. I think you get to adjust and leverage the situation. You know, we've seen it. I'm on a couple boards in healthcare, and we've talked about telehealth for years. Well, we're there, and I commend the government for paying for telehealth now beyond just rural networks, and I think it's something we'll never, ever not do now that we're getting used to the access, the possibility. We had an employee this week that got shingles. She never had to go to the doctor. She actually took her photo, did the whole thing via telehealth, and I think the same thing with online learning educationally. I think the other thing that's really allowed us to do is build relationships, and this is what the employees remember. You know, they're going to remember who helped them at this time. They're going to remember, I know, for example, my administrative assistant, I know because of school and other things, at 1 o'clock, her youngest child goes down for nap time. That is the time that we can get some things done. So I think employees are going to really remember you at these times on as Congressman Steil says, who really steps up, who allows flexibility, who shows concern. And the same thing with our customers. You know, we also have a not-for-profit. We're trying to contact donors, not asking for money, just updating them where we're at. We're right now sending handwritten thank you notes to all our season ticket holders. We do have the payroll protection plan with the Blue Wahoos, so we're using our employees now to send handwritten thank you notes to every one of our customers. We're trying to provide sponsors with ways that we can keep them out there even when we don't have baseball games and so on. And, of course, the community. I think our community really is something we can reach out to, particularly like you've done, John, a marvelous job on in training. We just finished a social media a webinar with 383 community people signed on. So we're using this as a time to build the skill set, to what I call sharpen the saw, as Stephen Covey said in 7 Essential Habits of Highly Effective People, on how do we be better. So we basically now have 11 courses that we're having every leader go through. They're about an hour apiece, from how to hire, how to onboard, how to communicate, how to figure out cost of goods. This is a great time to get some things we've never gotten to. We're also creating toolkits. So when we do have staff changes, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The other thing I would talk about here is sometimes you got to tear the bandage off. And there are certain times when we're probably made a few decisions we should have made earlier, whether it's stop doing something that we should have done. Maybe it's a product. We're changing hours. We've extended hours in some places. We've shortened them in other places. We've made some tough decisions in leaders. It's sort of a time, and these times you sort of know what you got, who steps up and who doesn't, and we've made some tough decisions there. And that's something that I think is really important. We've also been really straight on where we're sticking to it, because the question first came, are you going to go through with the Beloit snapper? Absolutely. What are you going to do with baseball if you don't play? Well, we're going to get ready for the season after that. And Rishi are lucky enough to financially be able to deal with some of these issues, but we know, and that's why what Congressman Steil is doing is so vital, that most of us couldn't. I think in Pensacola we're going to lose an awful lot of small businesses, because even with the payroll protection plan, getting the customers back is not going to be easy for everyone. And then I think be prepared to be better as I wrap up. Let's make sure that we come out of this, we're better as individuals. We've told even some of our people that we know we probably will have to furlough if we don't play baseball, but we want them to be better. So we're pushing skill training like crazy, so they're better when they come back, but if they don't come back, they're better wherever they be. So we're trying to do everything we can to help our employees develop skill sets, even with the cross-training that goes on in tough times. As a company, we're going to be better. We're taking and brushing off every standard operating procedure. There should be no reason when this is done that every company should have up-to-date standard operating procedures now. We're re-looking at everything, the toolkits. And the main thing we want to be, and I know Janesville wants to be, is we want better communities. We've got people are listening. We did a town hall meeting virtually, myself and the editor of the newspaper, and it's amazing how many people turned in. So now that we've got people listening, we have a chance to raise the community's IQ, and I think that's really vital as we go through here to end up being better individuals, better companies, and a better community. So thank you very much, Don, for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Quint. There's a whole lot to digest there, and I really appreciate it. I would encourage the listeners, if they haven't read either of the books that I mentioned, to take a look and read them, because a lot of the same kinds of themes about tearing the bandage off, being prepared to be better, raising the bar, those are themes I think I remember reading in your books, and they're excellent ways to improve your skill set. So with that said, you're welcome.
Don, one last thing. StuderI.org, we have lots of free training material that we're giving it away to communities right now, too.
Would you repeat the
Yes,
Studer what?
StuderI.org. It's our not-for-profit that does a lot of training and development for small businesses and things, and we've opened up everything for free here during this time for training and development. So StuderI.org.
Thank you very much. And Studer is with an E, Studer, just in case some of our listeners might not know that. All right, I'm going to turn now to questions and answers. And this first one is probably not a surprise to you, Congressman Steil. There's some dissatisfaction bordering on anger as it relates to a lot of the news argument or news about the PPE program. I'm sure you've heard it already, where a big chain like Potbelly or the nation's largest sushi chain or Ruth Chris gets $20 million. It turns out that about 9% of that $349 billion or $350 billion went to these very large loans of $5 million or more. And that just doesn't seem to sit well with a lot of our really small business members. So I was hoping that maybe you could address how that can happen, maybe if there are going to be changes going forward, or just some perspective on that.
John, first off, you got to call me Bryan, and everybody on the call needs to call me Bryan. But let's dive into what went right, what we could improve upon on the PPP. So first off, let's talk about the funding, and then let's talk about who got the funding. So it was, as you noted, $349. I'm calling it $350 billion that was in the first round that was fully allocated the middle of last week. We've now gotten into this partisan tussle, and this is where, when partisanship gets in the way of policy, it is beyond frustrating for everybody. That's where we're at. There's discussions and there's general agreement, and then the devil is in the details, and that's the delay here. But it's very likely that we're going to see a significant increase in the PPP funding, hopefully sometime this week. I'm going to jump in my Chevy Traverse and drive back out to Washington the moment we get notice that the deal has been struck and we have a vote. The general understanding is that the increase will be in the neighborhood of $250 billion to $310 billion. For a lot of people on the call, I know some people know the ins and outs of the PPP program. I think it's important to note 75% of those funds are allocated towards payroll. So it's in large part protecting the paychecks of the employees who are at these smaller companies, meaning 500 or fewer employees. And the other 25% can go to things like utilities or the interest on your mortgage or for your rent. The question then is, and as I said on the outset, this by no means was a perfect bill, but sometimes you don't get the opportunity to let perfect be the enemy of the good, and it was a means of getting relief out immediately. Certain groups got a little bit of a better deal than others. As obviously noted, one group in that is the large restaurant chains that operate as one large restaurant. So as many people would know, if you looked, you saw Shake Shack the other day give back the money. And there, in the way that the bill was written, restaurants that had multiple small businesses across the United States were allowed to be viewed as multiple small businesses rather than one large company like all other industries were dealt with. You saw the pushback become so aggressive that Shake Shack gave back $10 million in this context. The other fault that I've also heard from a lot of people is the order in which the loans were given out. Some banks, not all, some banks definitely prioritized their own customers that had loans. So they identified who was the riskiest business loan that they had out, and they prioritized getting the PPP funding to that business. There's going to be a lot of review and look back to see how this program worked. There's areas that worked very well. There's areas that there could definitely be improvements, and that's part of these negotiations. But again, I think one thing is there's going to be a look back to improve upon this, and this is the challenge of putting together a program of this size and order of magnitude that's brand new, never been done before, rushed through in 1 week, really from idea creation to passing into law. In less than 7 days later, it was being implemented. It was one of these things where we had to get relief out to people quickly. And I share the frustration that some people have had with this program. It is not perfect, but it was at a moment in time where we knew we needed to get relief out to make sure that these small businesses got enough duct tape to get them from where they were, to keep them through until we get back up and on our feet. And the reason it's so critical, in particular for small businesses, is we need to have a business for people to have jobs to go back to. So all these people who've fallen on hard times, who are possibly would have been furloughed but are now able to be paid through the Paycheck Protection Program, when we get back on our feet and these businesses get the green light to reopen, these individuals have a job to go back to. And so, one, for the people that have had unique problems, I encourage them to reach out to my office. I'd be more than happy to review what happened to them and happy to be a resource between my office and the Department of Treasury or the Small Business Administration if there's a hiccup. For the people that have been notified that the funding terminated, join me in pushing other members of Congress to get this funding put back in. And again, I think it's very likely we'll get that this week. And duly noted some of the frustrations that people have had with certain businesses that got cut to the front of the line. I find that frustrating and offensive, but also where the banks have kind of cherry-picked who they gave priority to get through first, which is in part why it's so important that in the second tranche that we're identifying and making sure that small banks and small community credit unions have access to these funds as well to be able to take care of some of our smallest businesses in Janesville.
Oh, that was a great answer because it also covers the next question, and I'll only briefly state that the idea that banks were cherry picking and of course trying to get their fees up by getting the big loans out first. I followed up on that with our area financials, just so you know, Bryan, and the universal feedback was our policy is first come, first serve. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. There's a lawsuit with Chase in California, but I can tell you that our bankers responded immediately saying we will not tolerate that. It will be a first come, first serve approach. So I think for our callers who might be frustrated by that, might be thinking it happens here, I really don't think it is. Okay, next question. This goes to Quint. Being a leader is hard in good times, and it's really hard when times are troubled like they are right now. It says we need to be optimistic, realistic, and proactive, but how do we best help ourselves be a good leader in these hard times?
Well, thanks, John. I think it is tough. You know, I get people come up to me periodically and they say, I'm not comfortable doing that. And I said, I've never seen the definition of Dictionary of Leadership to say be comfortable. I do think what we have to do is take care of ourselves. You know, I sort of said in these times where at my age I'm sort of on a pause too here, and a whole bunch of reasons. And I said I can either sit home and be fit or be fat, and it's which choice do I want to do. So I love the thing when they talk about when you get on an airplane, you put the oxygen on yourself first. So I think number one is surround yourself with other people, and don't be afraid to pick up the phone. You know, people I say, well, I don't want to call you because you're so busy. You know, I give my cell phone number out at ballparks. It's 850-232-4648. I got a phone call from a lady who I've known for years, and she feels she's going to lose her job. And she said, I just needed to call you, and you need to tell me I'm going to be okay. And I said, well, you're going to be okay. Now, I'm not sure she's going to make the same amount of money in the future she's making right now. So I think all we can do is take care of ourselves, which means talk to friends, share our own anxiety. It's very painful. I mean, it's very painful. Rishi and I did a Zoom call for our employees, and after I gave the facts, I asked Rishi if she to say something, and she got tears in her eyes. And she shared how bad she feels that some people are going to not be working, some of the tough decisions we make. So I think be authentic. Be authentic with what you're going through, but not be to the point where you're acting like you're in more pain than them, because certainly many of them are in more pain than the owner, but some of the owners are. I mean, we've got owners that are going to lose a lot with this. So I think be authentic, surround yourself with a support group, and take a while to take care of yourself as much as you possibly can. And there is no great answer in this. I've been reading a lot. I've read the book by Eric Larson and Winston Churchill before the United States joined the World War, about how he stuck in there and said, we're going to get through this. And I think that's the main thing, is that self-talk, that we're going to get through this, and you know what? It's going to be painful, but what can I do to be better for getting through this? Because I don't want to not become better with this situation. I have to become better.
Thank you, Quint. This could actually, I think, this next question could actually go to both of you, but there's a gentleman who's a member, longtime member of Forward Janesville, who's in the travel agency business, and hospitality and travel has just been kneecapped. I mean, from airlines to cruise ships to hotels and restaurants and the like, they're looking at a long recovery period. He reports that he was able to successfully get a PPP loan and keep his employees on the payroll for 8 weeks or so, but he's looking at a much longer horizon, and I'm wondering if either of you could kind of give him some counsel and advice on how to look beyond the 6 to 8 weeks where he has some relief and get ready for what could be quite an extensive period of time for recovery in that industry.
Quint, you want me to take the front end and you can give... Go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead. My front end is this one. Okay, go ahead, Congressman. For Bryan.
Bryan?
Tell you what, I'll jump in quick, and then we'll get more positive news from Quint here. One, let me just jump back to what John said earlier about our community banks and credit unions. I want to be clear. The overwhelming majority of our banks and credit unions stepped up to the plate and processed $350 billion in loans in 14 days. I mean, these men and women literally were working 24 hours a day for 14 days. In the overwhelming majority, did the right thing. And this is kind of where there's dogs and cats where things go sideways. We got to track those people down. But the overwhelming majority of our bankers, in particular those in Wisconsin and Janesville, did a spectacular job. Let me jump to the question in particular. As you think about movie theaters or JPAC, and then let alone Noah's Ark and some of these others that are going to be the most challenged businesses as we come back out of this, this is an opportunity where we can really improve our testing. And as we get our heads wrapped around the numerator and the denominator of this problem, we're not only going to attack it from the medical standpoint, but also where people need to feel comfortable and safe returning to their normal way of behavior. And so some of this is going to be a medical technology side where ultimately, hopefully, we are going to get to a vaccine. That's months and months away. People are talking about 12 to 18 months would be a really fast timeline. It may be longer. But at the same time, we can ramp up our testing, which will give people a lot more comfort, and we will all have a lot more knowledge as to where are their hotspots and how can we operate safely and get some of these bigger businesses that have, by their nature, have concentrations of people coming together back open and operational. And I'll pass it over for you, Quint.
Well, I think there's no easy answer, and I'm not in Wisconsin much. I do have a place there, those still, but, down here, of course, we're in a tourist area. You talk about hotels. Our hotels have laid off 90% of their workers, and the beaches are even closed, so they'll probably be reopening here in about a week, a little bit. I do think, though, it's a great time. There's certain times when things happen that things become better than they were before. I have no fear of flying right now. I think planes are probably cleaner and better than they've ever been before. My nephew just flew this week and said when he got on the plane it was the cleanest he's ever been. So I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see it with personal hygiene. I know we're going next week to mask and gloves on everybody that works in all our organizations. So I think as far as a virus and a cleanliness point of view, we're going to be in better shape than we've ever been. But I think it'll be gaining the confidence back. And the real challenge, though, I think, as Bryan has said, is getting people the money so they can't afford to do some of these things. So I think there's going to be some pent-up energy. I think as soon as people know it's safe, that you'll see it pick back up. I just don't think, as Bryan said, probably for the next 12 or 18 months, it is going to pick up. So all you can do is restructure to the size you're going to fit in if you can. I feel tough on some of the school districts who, they can't downsize, yet they're going to have less money, and hospitals have paid a big price for this, and I'm glad to see some of the economic stimulus going to both the municipal government, city government, and education. So it's a long road. But for some, I know for us, we probably are going to do some things personally that I should have always done hygiene-wise, but I do think our businesses have never been cleaner. I had somebody the other day that said they've never been in a gas station as clean as the one they're just in their life. So the good news coming out of this is I think we're going to be much better about hygiene, cleanliness, and so on. So thank you.
Can I just piggyback on what Quint said, because I think it's really important as you think about the leaders on this call. There's an American entrepreneurial spirit that allows our capitalist structure to allow each local and individual business and worker to find creative ways to approach this. And so as you see, as Quint was referencing, right, you can go into a bathroom, and it's as clean as you've ever seen. We see businesses in Janesville find creative and clever ways to keep people safe. And that's where the American entrepreneurial spirit is going to be at its best, is our leaders find ways to come out of this creatively and find ways that they can operate safely. Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off one of the themes in that last question. When we talk to our members about opening back up and getting started, the two things that come to the forefront are availability of testing and the availability of appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE. You mentioned that I think it was one of the early bills that was passed was a $50 billion bill to boost the testing capabilities. There are a lot of people, though, who wonder why it's still so hard to get a test in a community like this. But it isn't just our community. You can see across the country the need for more testing is acute. And then on the PPP side, or the personal protective equipment side, I mean, our hearts are lifted by the story of Prent Corporation designing and building a prototype mask, a plastic shield in 48 hours, and now they're capable of making 1 million of them a week. So there are stories like that, but there still seems to be this feeling that all of the protective personal equipment needed is just not available. I'm sure that's a topic of conversation, Bryan. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Great question, John, and I think it's on everybody's mind, and I'm regularly talking to experts on this. Let's take the testing piece first. So one is what we saw is a global demand from pretty much every country in the globe going after a limited supply of total products. And so as you look at our testing capability, it's improved dramatically, right? So the United States has done more tests than anybody else, but we have a long ways to go to get to a spot where we're satisfied that we're in the best position that we can be in to attack the virus. There's definitely supply constraints on some of the critical components to complete testing. We need to continue to provide the resources there, but part of that is just a supply constraint for the limited number of facilities that make some of these key supplies that go into the testing. That's one component, but not all the components of the issue. Another piece of this is where we do have supplies, we need to match them up. So I'm going to oversimplify this a bit, but to kind of get the point across, is everybody's pulling supplies together. Some people have maybe the test, but the other person has the test kit. And unless they're talking to each other, you can't run the whole test. You need two pieces of the puzzle. And everybody globally is pulling some of this supply. And then three, some instances, we have more capacity than we're utilizing. So there was a really good Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel article laying out that over the weekend, that the state of Wisconsin has the capacity to do roughly 7,000 tests, but the total number of tests being completed is closer to 1,500, an order of magnitude less than 25% of capacity. And so we need kind of an all-of-the-above approach to tackle this, right? So we need to increase the supply of the testing supplies to begin with. We need better coordination to get the supplies to where they need to be, and we need better communication to make sure that we are utilizing the full capacity of the supplies that we do have. And so I'm of the view of an all-of-the-above approach to get this done. As it relates to PPE, same thing. There was global demand for a limited number of supply. We've also exposed the full extent that the U.S. supply chain is dependent on foreign countries, in particular China, for key supplies. So there's a policy side on the look back that we're going to have to make improvements to make sure that some of these key supplies are produced in the United States going forward. We're also going to have businesses probably naturally onshoring and wishing that they had done that a long time ago. And then two, we're seeing businesses really ramp up, dramatically ramp up production to try to catch up to the PPE. We're doing better and better on our ability to produce PPE. You told the story just moments ago there of Quint stepping up on the face shields. Charter NEX, a big plastics company in Milton, Wisconsin, teamed up with Jockey to do medical gowns for nurses and doctors. We're seeing that step up, but some of this is just a pure capacity constraint when you have the very unique situation that we do where there is massive global demand for some of these products. So every country, every healthcare system in the globe is placing orders on a limited number of facilities that can produce this equipment. The upside is many businesses in the United States that did not produce this before are stepping up to the plate and working extra hours to make up for that extra demand. And you see it right here in Janesville in companies that are producing some of this critical PPE for our nurses and doctors and others. They're stepping up to the plate, and the supply chain is catching up. But that is part of this stay-at-home process, is buying us time to allow a lot of our supply chain to catch up to the problems that we've had.
All right. That is a critical set of issues to our recovery. I can't stress that enough from the feedback I've gotten from members. We have a lot of small members. Sometimes there's only one or two people. And they're wondering, there's actually two parts to this. One would be whether or not there would be a phase two of the individual stimulus checks. But beyond that is these sole proprietors, the folks who work on a contract basis in a variety of fields, but they don't employ other people. They would, they're basically sitting on the sidelines because the people who typically had contracted them to do various things are not doing it, and they're wondering if there might be some relief in the next round of funding. Has that been a topic of conversation, Bryan?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people. I think about the woman who cuts my hair in Janesville. She's a sole proprietor by herself, and I'm not going in for haircuts because nobody's going in for haircuts. There's not a backlog because I'm only going to get one haircut when we're on the other side of this. I can't go back and get 5 more for all the ones that I've missed. And so I think it's important to note, one, that sole proprietors are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. Those regulations out of the Treasury Department came out a week later than the first set of guidance. And so I'd encourage anybody on this call that is or knows one who is a sole proprietor to reach out to their local bank or credit union here in Janesville and to begin the dialogue of how they may qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program. And again, I'm confident that ultimately we're going to get additional funds. So currently, for the short term, it's out of money. I'd still go to your local lender today and begin that application process if you previously didn't start, such that you can take advantage of PPP when we get it properly funded. I think that's probably the most important piece of this. The other is making sure that some of these sole proprietors realize that the rules as it relates to the unemployment insurance in the state of Wisconsin have changed dramatically. And so under, 3-4 months ago, under what I'll call the old rules, very likely, each individual is different, each situation is different, very likely a sole proprietor would not have qualified for Wisconsin unemployment insurance. The rules have changed dramatically, and I'd encourage them to go and look at whether or not that individual now qualifies for Wisconsin unemployment insurance, and noting that the unemployment program in Wisconsin, one, waived the first week of the waiting period. So you no longer, you get your unemployment day one that you file. So the sooner you file, the better off you are. And two, it's been increased by $600 a week. That's a very substantial increase. And so those are the two pieces of the puzzle as we look for sole proprietors who've been hit really hard, including, I think of, barbers in Janesville or hairstylists that are helping people out. Their business has gone not down 10% or 20%, it's gone to zero. And they are hard hit, and those are people that are not going to be able to easily recover. But there are two programs that they should look at. And I agree, going forward, I think the real critical piece of this is that we stay focused on kind of two key things instead of these broad-based approaches that help everyone. There were reasons that was in the first bill. But as we go forward, I think it's important that we're focused in on people that are economically directly impacted by this, so we can get the help to where it's needed. And two, making sure we continue to attack the health side of this to make sure that we're ramping up as fast as possible our testing capabilities and our PPE. And so the more narrowly focused we can get from a federal policy standpoint, I think also the better off we're going to be.
Thank you, Bryan. Quint, I have a question here. If you were advising Janesville and Rock County, what 1, 2, maybe 3 things or actions would you suggest that we should be doing right off the top?
Local. I think people have to realize that it's all about if you can keep your dollars local. And you're very fortunate because you have a lot of opportunity to do that. I just cringe when people are, one of the challenges we have right now is, of course, because of what's happening is we've gone less local, more online, and we've got to, as soon as we can, stop that because a local dollar will go 7 times. When we buy something online that gets shipped to our house, we just don't get that advantage. It's $1 and it goes someplace else versus $1 going 7 times. So one, it would be shop local. Number 2, it would be training and development. This is a perfect time because people have learned they need better skills than they've ever learned before. So I would say beef up the training and development for not only staff but certainly for leaders and so on. And the third thing I think would really be to continue to raise the civic IQ. I think the best days are ahead for Rock County. Rishi and I would not be investing significantly in Rock County, Wisconsin right now if we didn't think it was going to get better. Diane Hendricks would not be significantly continue to invest in the community. I mentioned Janesville in almost all my radio interviews. I mentioned in my columns the work of Prent Corporation and Gex Corporation and Jockey and the things that have happened, even in Walworth County. So I think you have to look at what's right. It's impossible to be grateful and unhappy at the same time. And though this is a tough time, I've lived here in Pensacola through Hurricane Ivan. I've lived through the oil spill. Both of them were tragic. Both we thought we'd never get through, yet we came through, I think, better for it, though there was painful. So I think Rock County has to look at what you have going for it. Just having a congressman like Bryan Steil, listening to him is pretty positive, and listening to what he's doing, looking at the great advantage. And the last thing, and to close on this, John, is I think it really has shown the value of chambers. As I've traveled the country, it's funny who people turn to. And many times in communities, people have wondered who to turn to. Well, I would say the number one place that people are turning to in the United States of America right now to tell them, where are the loans? Where do I go? How can you get me help? What about a single proprietor? Is the chamber. So I think continuing to support the chamber is vital in this time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that unsolicited plug, Quint. I appreciate it very much. And I want everybody on this call to know that the entire staff and the volunteer leadership team here is working every day and long hours trying to be of assistance and figure out ways that we can help our members not just survive but thrive as we come out of this. I do want to give both of you one last chance for any parting thoughts or encouragement you might give to our listeners. I'll start with you, Bryan.
Appreciate it, John. Thanks for having me on. I would echo Quint's comment there about the importance of focusing and keeping your dollars locally here in Janesville whenever you can. This is a challenging time. We're going to ultimately get through this, and I think be stronger for it. I think the work that you're doing, John, in Forward Janesville of being a resource for everybody is spectacular. I'd encourage anybody who's looking to find a quick link to local, federal, and state resources, feel free to go to my website, steil.house.gov. We have links to pretty much everything I've talked about here today. It's not a great time to listen to your neighbor's Facebook feed to get the official information. You want to go to these official government resources to confirm whether or not you qualify for things like unemployment or the Paycheck Protection Program. And the final thing I'd say is do not hesitate to reach out to me or to my office if you have a problem or you need assistance navigating something related to the federal government. We've been a resource to people. There was a young woman who was trapped in Peru. We worked with the State Department. We've worked with Jockey and Charter NEX to get FEMA approval for personal protective equipment. We've helped people navigate the PPP. My office is fully open and operational. Mind you, we're working remotely, but we are fully operational, and I am ready to go to help anybody that does need assistance, and would encourage you to not hesitate to reach out during these challenging times. And I think, as Quint said, these are about as challenging times as I could have ever imagined in Janesville. But Janesville's seen tough times before. I mean, we saw the loss of the GM plant. We clawed our way back. And this is going to be another one of those struggles, but we're going to claw our way back. And on the other side of this, I think we're ultimately going to be better and stronger on the other side. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We'll ultimately overcome this, but it's going to be a matter of all of us working together to do it. And so, John, I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the call.
Well, thank you for taking an hour out of your busy schedule to join us. I do want to give Quint an opportunity as well for any parting thoughts that he'd like to share with the callers.
Yeah, I think what's different about this one, it's nationwide and worldwide. And what I mean by that is, for example, when Pensacola was hit by Hurricane Ivan, well, other cities could get ahead of us because there's things we couldn't do. When the GM plant closed, or Parker Penn closed, which was another one in Janesville at one time, some of the industrial sites that closed in Beloit, it impacted a small period, which allowed other cities to compete with you. I think right now, the fact that it's an even playing field, it's going to come down to who wants to win. Who's the most competitive city? Who's the most competitive county? Because we're all coming out of this at the same time pretty much. So it's not like it only hit one area. It hit the country. And I just have great confidence knowing the people of Janesville and the people of Rock County that you're a pretty competitive place. So just remember, when you're coming out of here, when the starting gate goes up, all 50 states, all hundreds and thousands of communities and millions of people are coming out of the gate pretty close to the same time, for the first time maybe ever in the history of the United States. So I think instead of looking upon this as something that's I know it's terrible, but I think for Janesville and Rock County, it's a tremendous time to rally together and come out of this quicker than anybody else and get the competitive advantage for where you want to be, which I think is the best city in the world.
That was a remarkable perspective. I appreciate that. That is a great way to wrap this up. Thanks again to Bryan, or Congressman Steil, and to Quint Studer. I encourage you to check out those links that were mentioned. Quint also is an author of some renown, and I think you should check out his books as well. And Quint, we look forward to seeing you back in this area soon, and we look forward, of course, to going to a baseball game in the new Snapper Stadium that you are working on.
Well, we're very excited, and again, a compliment to a local patriot, Diane Hendricks, for making it possible.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and the recording of this call will be available in the next few days, and if you'd like to share it with other people, you can share that link, and so others who weren't able to join us today can also enjoy this. Have a good day, stay safe, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday, same time. Thanks.
Thanks, bye-bye.